Ukraine claims to have another punch loaded up in its counteroffensive. But are they pivoting directions, switching elsewhere? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's June 21st, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first let's take a look at the Institute for the Study of War. And what I thought was interesting is that they're reporting yesterday that Ukrainian forces have conducted counteroffensive operations in at least two sectors of the front on June 20th. They said that the operations occurred on the administrative border between Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk Oblast and in western Zaporizhzhia Oblast. But the Russian MOD, of course, is saying that while the counteroffensive is happening, they claim to have repelled all Ukrainian assaults. It's not clear that that's exactly true. But what is interesting is the Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Defense, Hanna Maliar, said that ongoing Ukrainian operations have several tasks and are not solely focused on liberating territory, and that Ukrainian forces have yet to start the main phase of counteroffensive operations. This is surprising, and I'm almost a little skeptical. Again, this gradual escalation of combat operations looks very Soviet. It's very Red Army in terms of its tactical sophistication, which is to say it's not that sophisticated. NATO equipment is meant for NATO combat. And NATO combat is about speed. It's about breakthroughs. It's about communication. It's about being dynamic. It's called a forward defense. It's the idea that the best way to block a punch is to be throwing a punch. That is the core NATO doctrine, that if you don't want your opponent to hit you, hit them first, right? And that is what this equipment is meant for. That's what a Leopard tank is designed for. It's what an Abrams is designed for. So implementing it in a different way, I think, can be very, very problematic. Now, let's take a look at the control map. What I thought was interesting, again, we've got some limited advances from the Ukrainian forces. Here we go. So the most significant change has been outside of Robotyne. You can see Ukrainian forces advancing. Again, not a lot of space, maybe a kilometer at the largest point. Taking Russian forces from about, let's see if we can get a measurement here, from about this pinpoint to this pinpoint. So just a little over a kilometer of territory. Oh, we can undo that. But as you can see, they haven't really even gotten to the Russian main line of defense, which is well south of Robotyne. They'll have to liberate this village and then liberate Novoprokopivka, and then they will have to punch through this Russian defensive line, this two-layered trench network. So they certainly have their work cut out for them, even though they are continuing to progress. The reports are that the fighting is very heavy. And when you hear those reports of heavy fighting, again, it's tough to know what heavy means, especially when you're talking about a reporter for whom all fighting seems heavy. But it's not clear on whether or not it's true that this is not the main phase of the counteroffensive, that there's still a bigger push to come. Now, if you want to check out some of the combat videos from this counteroffensive and you want to keep me independent, support what I do, and ensure that I can continue to bring you guys the news updates every day, the best way is to become a member. Any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the members-only content where I take a look at the most viral war footage of the week. And we just took a look at a CivDiv video on Friday. I'm going to actually try to drop one or two, another video today, Wednesday, and then we'll have another video Friday. So if you want access to this content and you want to support what I do, keep me independent, you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com. Link is in the description or over here in the card. Okay, taking a look at the combat map, this is what I found even more interesting, right? One, you're seeing Ukraine start to dial its focus in a little bit, right? You can see they're launching some heavy attacks towards Robotyne. This map actually has Ukrainian forces beginning to liberate the village of Robotyne, as well as pushing out into this open territory here. And I think this is reflective of, again, what you would want to see if you're trying to achieve that breakthrough of lines, which is to create a small area of intense pressure where Russian forces are likely to experience a collapse. You also see, of course, fighting continuing to take place near Matakivka, but you're not seeing Russian forces withdraw from Rivnopil and along this roadway, which is itself, I think, pretty interesting, right? This is a very, very thin line here that Ukrainian forces are not cutting off. And I'm extremely curious as to why this is, honestly. You can see here Rivnopil, and maybe this is more accurate where it doesn't look like quite such a thin line, right? It looks more reasonable to say that Russian forces think they can hold when they control this entire front here. But this still is the reality that there's one route out of here and it's fairly close to the front line. But as we've seen in previous days, Ukraine appears to be attempting to flank, pushing along this side. So again, it's not necessarily Ukraine's strategy to pressure this particular area. It's not really clear to me, at least, on what their strategy is per se. Again, you can see just the extensive fortification network that really Ukraine hasn't even run into yet. But here's what I thought was most interesting. Look at the volume of fighting taking place along the Kreminna-Lyman area. As you can see, there's considerable Ukrainian offensive action. Even the defense forces of Ukraine are reporting it as heavy fighting near this forest, right? And this is where we're seeing more offensive action take place. But you're again left with this question of why? What happened to fighting in Bakhmut? What happened to fighting in Donetsk? These feel like continual probing attacks. These feel like continual efforts to push Russian lines in different places, but can they even conduct exploitation? Is the force in this fight big enough to actually conduct a breakthrough? And if they did break through Russian lines, who is going to exploit that breakthrough? Is there a brigade sitting in Siversk? There should be, but maybe there isn't. Maybe the brigade that was fighting in Bakhmut has pivoted. It's hard to know, and it's hard for Ukrainian forces. They have to have enough volume of combat troops to push through when they break Russian lines. Again, this is a really tough nut to crack. You can see here when you get a little bit of the relief, you can see this is pretty mountainous areas. It's hard for tanks and armored forces to cut through. You can see that there is significant fortifications here and here, but there is a potential route for a breakthrough here at Novodruesk. And if they can achieve that, again, it looks like they're going to have to really have their work cut out for them, navigating through what looks like two kind of at least hilly regions or mountainous regions, pushing through there, creating a corridor, and then bringing through maybe armored forces, but it's not even clear that there's an actual roadway through here. And then if they did, they'd still have to cross the Siversky Donetsk, which, as we know, river crossing is really militarily tough in this conflict. Again, also possible they could be trying to break and turn the Russian forces. I think that would probably be the most reasonable plan. Try to break through here, pin some Russian forces against the Siversky Donetsk and annihilate them, or force their withdrawal, and then turn this entire defensive line and push them out, right? Clearing through these constructed fortifications. I think that's also a pretty reasonable potential path to significant Ukrainian gains. But again, that's how you have to think about this offensive, that it's not about liberating village by village for years. It's not going to work against an opponent like Russia, who's so strong on the defensive. It's going to have to be breaking the opponent, right? So anyway, what I wanted to talk about, of course, is one of the biggest news stories is that the Pentagon claims an accounting error is actually going to be giving $2 billion in additional aid to Ukraine. And this is something I've talked about for a while. A lot of the people who complain, they say, oh, we're giving so much money to Ukraine. And yes, the US government is definitely sending Ukraine checks, like to help bankroll some of their government expenses while they spend a lot of their tax revenue on combat operations. But a lot of it is symbolic like this, right? So what the Pentagon found, it actually overestimated what they had provided for ammunition, missiles, and other equipment by $6.2 billion. Now, what is the accounting error specifically? Well, what they talk about is how the Pentagon decides what a weapon system is worth. And there's really, in this case, the two ways they thought about it. There's actually a couple of ways you can do Pentagon accounting, but there is the book value of an item, which is usually what they paid for it, sometimes adjusted forward for inflation. And then there is the replacement value, right? But replacement value isn't actually a great replacement. They're a great measure. Why? Because oftentimes the old style equipment isn't made anymore. It's sort of like saying, how much is let's say you had a rare 70s Corvette that still ran great. What's it worth? Well, you could think about its worth in a couple of ways. The easiest is, what can I sell it for? The problem is there's not like a robust market for old howitzers. Right? You can't go on Howitzer Trader and look up the value. So you have to use different estimates. Well, one estimate is to say, what did we pay for the howitzer when it was new? And then we bring that forward to this current year. So we say it cost us, let's say, I'm making these numbers up. Let's say it cost us $1 million in 1990. We go, okay, $1 million in 1990, 2% inflation means that today it's $3 million. And you say, great, it's a $3 million howitzer. Or you could say the replacement value, which would say, hey, we need to replace it with another howitzer. Well, they go, well, there's some problems. First, they may say, you can't replace it, sort of like a Corvette. How would you rebuild a 1970s Corvette? The factories haven't been tooled for those items for years. So it could be very expensive to actually replace like for like. You also have the issue where they might say, hey, we'll replace it with a 2023 Corvette. And you go, well, you're replacing something that had, no computer chips, no touch screen, no anything, with a high-tech modern vehicle. You go, you can't sit there and claim that it's worth, $80,000 when that's what a brand new Corvette is worth, a 2023. So you're apples to orange comparing this. And so you see how quickly, without when you have things that are so rare, or in the case of military hardware, so infrequently purchased and almost never resold, that you don't actually know how to price them. It can be really hard. And so to sit there and be like, oh, the Pentagon, here's what's going to happen. A bunch of know-nothings on Twitter are going to claim the Pentagon lost $6.2 billion. The Pentagon doesn't know how to account for its equipment. The Pentagon, provided less aid to Ukraine than they claimed. The Pentagon's changing the rules. They're going to say all this stuff. None of that's true. This is the Pentagon having a dumb accounting department that made an actually understandable error. Sometimes Congress can sit down and be like, here's how you're going to value this equipment. You're going to value it at, book value. You're going to value it at replacement value, whatever, right? The rules are different and complicated. And someone in the Defense Finance Office made a mistake when they decided on how to value this aid. That's it. Very common accounting procedures. Not that sketchy, right? But so don't listen to the Twitterverse, okay? Just do me that favor. Because I know the edgelords are going to be rolling out. They always do whenever the Pentagon makes an error. Like, sorry, the Pentagon, they're not subject to GAAP, and they can't be, because the way corporations do accounting differently because they're for-profit entities, right? So their accounting has to be tight in a specific way, right? The Pentagon just doesn't have the same mission as, your dad's used car business, right? I don't know why I'm using all these car analogies today. I don't know what's up. But like, your local pizza shop, right? Because the pizza shop doesn't need to it doesn't need to beat other pizza shops, right? And that's what the Pentagon's job is. Pentagon's job is it doesn't have to make money. It just has to beat every other pizza shop, basically. So it spends in ways that corporate accounting wouldn't make any sense to them, right? So if you want to beat the other pizza shops, you always have to be innovating. You always have to be building a better pizza oven, something that doesn't yet exist. How do you do accounting for something that doesn't yet exist, right? You're like, R&D. It's just not the same. I don't know how else to put it. It's not the same. So they can't use corporate accounting standards, even though people really wish they could. And people have tried. That's the other thing. Smarter people than you and I have come in and tried to fix the Pentagon's accounting system, but it can't make sense, especially the way it's structured. Because remember, some of the soldiers' costs for benefits and care come out of the VA, a different agency, but they still sort of get accrued and occurred when the Pentagon spends it. So like, who's actually paying for it? Nuclear weapons are done with the Department of Energy, but they're kept at DOD facilities. So who pays for their maintenance specifically, right? When does the DOE maintenance budget begin and the Pentagon maintenance budget end? You have all this nonsense, right? And that's not without Congress helping out by crafting nonsense policies. Anyway, sorry. This is one of those themes that really annoys me, because it takes away from like the real discussion that like the Pentagon does do a bad job. They do waste a lot of money, but not the way the Twitter edgelords would have you believe. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this one. This has been an interesting one. A special thank you, as always, to our Colonel tier members. I appreciate you guys so much for your help. And of course, thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. There's so many of you guys on combatvetnews.com who have helped me out. I couldn't do this without you. I appreciate you so much. And I will see all you guys in the next one.